Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jeff Koo, and I'm a program manager in the Affordable Housing and Homelessness section at the City of Edmonton. I'd like to begin today with a land acknowledgement. The City of Edmonton acknowledges the traditional land on which we reside is in Treaty 6 territory. We would like to thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory for centuries, such as the Nehewa, Cree, Dene, Anishinaabe, Saulteaux, Nakota Ishka, Nakota Sioux, and Niitsitapi, Blackfoot peoples. We also acknowledge this as the Métis homeland and the home of one of the largest communities of Inuit south of the 60th parallel. It is a welcoming place for all peoples who come from around the world to share Edmonton as a home, and I am a clear example of this. Together, we call upon all of our collective honored traditions and spirits to work in building a great city for today and future generations. I'm the first generation of my family to be born in Canada and on Turtle Island. My sibling and I were both born here in Amisquache, Waskahikan. As with many children of new settlers to this land, I'm also still in discovery with this land and my direct connection to it. As time goes on and the more people I've come across, I learn more about our ravines and river valleys, the mountains to our west, the forests to the north in Treaty 8 territory, and the plains and foothills to the south in Treaty 7 territory, to learn to live in them, to interact with other creatures, the sky, water, and earth. I recognize that I've had more opportunities to do so compared to my parents and elders, and I am deeply grateful for the sacrifices they've made to provide me these opportunities. My connection to this land, as is with my family's, is but young and growing roots. This is where I was born, and I hope to stay and one day deepen my roots and grow a family of my own. I've appreciated the opportunities I've been afforded to learn from those whose roots have been tied more deeply, interwoven with complex stories and relationships with as many other families and what has happened on this land before us. As I learn more, I hope to contribute more to this community that I call home. I want to talk today about some good news, some challenging news, and a bit about where we're at. First up, some good news and some positive headlines. In 2018, City Council approved a 4-year funding for some ambitious and audacious goals. The city would help provide funding or land to help develop 2,500 units of affordable housing, including 600 units of supportive housing. We're in the final days of that plan, and I can say that the city has exceeded its targets. We've supported 2,728 new affordable housing units across the city, including 644 supportive housing units. We also have managed to leverage provincial municipal stimulus program funding to renovate and renew another 1,559 units of affordable and social housing units, most of which are city-owned. This success is a shared success involving many organizations presenting this month: Homeward Trust, Home Ed, Savita, and many other partners. For every dollar invested by the city, we've seen another 4 from other sources. Nearly $200 million from other levels of government and $351 million in equity from providers, resulting in a direct investment of $689 million in affordable housing. To add a bit of context, these 4-year totals surpass the entire previous decade. However, we know that this isn't the whole story. There is a homelessness crisis in Edmonton, and in fact, there's a homelessness crisis across the entire country. The visibility and impacts of homelessness are deeply and broadly felt. In Edmonton, the number of people that we know are experiencing homelessness has almost doubled since before the pandemic. And as we've seen from 311 calls, encampments have increased steadily over the past few years. This year is far worse than last year, which was far worse than the year before that. Many of the agencies you've heard from this month so far are on the front lines of this crisis. As of last week, there were 2,706 individuals in Edmonton that we know of experiencing homelessness. We know this from Homeward Trust's by name list, the real-time list of people experiencing homelessness. Of those 2,700 names, only really half of those people are visible. For every person in shelters or sleeping outside, about 1,200, there's at least one other person in Edmonton in a precarious situation that is technically homelessness, like couch surfing. When we see homelessness, we see the manifestations of a lot of factors: a drug poisoning crisis, increasing challenging economic conditions, strains on healthcare system, a lack of access to mental health and addiction support services. When you layer these things together, the circumstances become extremely dire for our most vulnerable citizens and community members, particularly at this time of year when things are getting colder. We look at the situation through the lens of compassion, looking at possible policy decisions, strategies, and problem-solving techniques. But for many people in our city, this crisis represents a threat, a reason to feel like their neighborhood is not safe, something that could ruin businesses, a problem that is hopeless, or something that we should move somewhere else. If you look at the total population of the city, around 1 in 360 Edmontonians are experiencing homelessness. For these individuals, life is extremely difficult. There's exposure to the elements. As winter sets in, we see fires in abandoned homes and deaths from smoke inhalation. There is violence and trauma. There are undoubtedly severe impacts on mental health. This number is devastating, but there's a cascading effect into the public services we all rely on. A small number of these people experiencing homelessness have complex needs like physical and mental illness, addictions, disorders, or disabilities. They often end up requiring the most serious interventions, such as emergency room visits, responses from fire, ambulance, or police, or interactions with the justice system. There are numerous academic studies weighing the costs and benefits of addressing homelessness through housing. Some are individual case studies, while others look at a larger population over time. There's no real way of capturing all of the costs and impacts of homelessness, but virtually all of these studies are united in an acknowledgement that the costs of not addressing homelessness likely outweigh the costs of housing people and providing necessary support services, particularly for people with the highest needs. The homelessness we see is really only the tip of the iceberg. I already mentioned the homelessness we don't see, but for every person we see experiencing homelessness, there's approximately 100 people just barely getting by. Right now, there are approximately 50,000 households experiencing core housing needs in Edmonton. Homelessness and affordable housing are connected. A city with high level of poverty, but lots of affordable housing will have lower rates of homelessness. And a city with lower rates of poverty, but low vacancy rates and high rental costs will have higher rates of homelessness. For example, what we see in San Francisco in compared to cities like Detroit. And this is what we saw in Edmonton during the big boom of the early 2000s. For these 50,000 households, we have people stuck in situations where they are likely paying too much for housing that may be too small and in need of major repairs. They simply can't afford a place that meets their needs. These households are vulnerable to economic turbulence. When the economy booms, rents skyrocket. When it falters, like it did during the pandemic, household decisions become much more difficult. We see things like a rapid increase in the use of services like the food bank, for instance. These numbers and the slides to follow come from our recently completed Housing Needs Assessment report. You can think of this needs assessment as market research for affordable housing. We used a methodology that is being adopted in cities across Canada. Please note that much of our quantitative analysis used 2016 federal census data because that's what was available. 2021 census data is expected to be available very soon, and we will update the needs assessment accordingly. But there are no indications telling us that this need will shrink as a result. 1 in 7 households in Edmonton are living in core housing need, which means that one or more of the following things. Either they pay more than 30% of their pre-tax income on housing, or there aren't enough rooms or spaces for the household size, and or major repairs are needed for the household. To be in core housing need, there's another qualification. Finding a well-maintained home with enough space would cost more than 30% of their income. This number includes homeowners. An example of what this might mean is an elderly person on a fixed income, possibly living with physical or mental illness and disability. They may be unable to keep up with maintenance while also being unable to access equity in the home due to the home income constraints and other increasing expenses like medical costs. 2/3 of the 50,000 households are renters. Renters are roughly 4 times more likely than homeowners to be struggling. As a result, the city's analysis and policies tend to place more emphasis on renter households. Typically, the affordable housing investments are focused on rental units. The majority of these folks need housing for less than $1,100 per month. Most of them need 1 or 2 bedrooms. A smaller subset, roughly 22%, can only afford roughly $375 per month. And another 20% of the households are just below average income, but they can't afford enough bedrooms for the size of the household. Through our assessment, we've also found that the 5 most typical demographics in need of affordable housing are 1, people with physical or mobility challenges, 2, people with mental health or addictions issues, 3, female heads of households, 4, seniors, and 5, Indigenous peoples. In the face of those 1 in 4 and 1 in 7 numbers, we have a significant shortfall in affordable housing. Only 1 in 24 homes in Edmonton are available to meet the demand for affordable housing. This is a massive gap. Without increased investment, it will only grow. The need, as I've described it today, can feel quite overwhelming, and it's natural to wonder, why do we find ourselves in this current state? This chart that you see is from the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, or CMHC, and it shows the number of social rental housing units built in Canada between 1972 and 2010. From the 1960s and to the 80s, there was a significant investment in affordable housing from all levels of government, most of which can be seen on this graph. In fact, most of Edmonton's current social housing stock is from this era. Properties managed by organizations like Savita and HomeEd. But this chart really points to a common theme all across Canadian cities. In the early 90s, government investment in affordable housing dropped dramatically. The federal government passed the responsibility onto provinces and investment shrank. We've been trying to recover ever since. And some would argue that this was the beginning of Canada's homelessness crisis. It's often heard that Edmonton is an affordable place to live, and that's true if you're making an average or above average income. And it's relatively affordable compared to cities like Vancouver or Toronto. But as we saw, it's a completely different story for many renters. This graph that you see shows you a glimpse into why this might be. This is the history of housing construction in Edmonton since 1990, with each bar representing a year. What you'll notice in the red, the relative proportion of rental stock built over time in Edmonton is extremely low. Most people in core housing need are renters. Edmonton has grown significantly in the past 3 decades, yet the market has focused on home ownership. More than 80% of homes constructed have been intended for homeowners. Although some increases have occurred since 2012, and more so very recently in 2021, very little purpose-built rental housing has been created. This has left Edmonton with a lack of rental housing in good condition. And while new rentals are being built, the vast majority are intended for those who can afford higher rents. On this graph, you'll see federal data on the number of affordable housing units by province across Canada. In 2021, Edmonton had 14,837 affordable and social housing units. Remember that most of Edmonton's inventory was built prior to 1990, and more than half of these units are either bachelor or 1-bedroom units. Along with Quebec, Alberta has the fewest number of affordable housing units per capita in the country. There is only 1 unit of affordable housing for every 108 residents in Alberta, and the national average is 1 unit per 56 residents. Along with the last couple slides, these statistics illustrate the vulnerability and risk of Edmonton's affordable housing inventory. We have a combination of insufficient supply, aging structures, and limited capacity within these units. So, What are we doing about it? The City of Edmonton's role in affordable housing has shifted and changed over time. Like the federal government and the province, the city built social housing from the 60s to the 80s. The city still owns roughly 2,000 units of social housing, and we are working with other levels of government to renew and bring social housing up to date. In the 1990s, the city moved away from developing and operating affordable housing and shifted towards supporting the affordable housing sector. As the homelessness crisis grew in the 2000s, Edmonton developed its first community plan to end homelessness in 2009. The City of Edmonton's role has shifted. It's moved away from directly building social housing to funding partners who are building affordable housing. For the most part, this has meant leveraging block funding from the provincial government, then investing that in the creation of new affordable housing units and the renovation and subsidy of other units. Despite growing investments for affordable housing, homelessness and its associated impacts have continued to worsen. In the 2010s, we recognized that affordable housing wasn't getting built fast enough. Existing social housing inventory was continuing to age. The city's auditor found that programs weren't meeting targets and goals, leaving provincial and federal money on the table due to a lack of shovel-ready projects to fund. On top of it all, community opposition to affordable housing continued to cast a shadow over new projects. We've seen it over and over again. People may be in favor of housing, but when they hear about it happening in their neighborhood, that support can quickly disappear. The city developed a new approach. The city would position itself as a funding partner, proactively making land and funding available to affordable housing providers. This funding could be leveraged to attract funding from other orders of government. By taking a small amount of risk as the first investor in, affordable housing providers would have a predictable and consistent investment partner in creating compelling shovel-ready projects that could attract investment to Edmonton. And this approach has been developed just in time as well to match up with federal and now provincial programs and goals. The city used its 2015 City Council approved affordable housing strategy to guide decision-making and develop a target and evidence-based investment plan for the past 4-year budget cycle. And in 2018, new targets were set to align with the budget process. Over the past 4 years, the city was able to invest in a total of 2,720 new affordable housing units, achieving the supportive housing target and surpassing the total unit target. This has meant more affordable housing units were developed in this 4-year plan than in the previous decade. The city investments attracted an additional $527 million of investment in affordable housing for Edmonton. In addition, the city and its partners HomeEd, GEF, and Civita took advantage of funding to renovate and renew 1,559 units of affordable and social housing, most of them city-owned. The results to date demonstrate the critical importance that municipal and local investment and leadership can have on affordable housing. Without a significant local commitment, progress would not have happened. It's crucial to work in lockstep with our partners to develop political and administrative relationships with other orders of government and to be flexible and ready to seize opportunities. Having compelling shovel-ready projects and sector capacity and infrastructure is the foundation for success. So I'd like to return to an iceberg image. Homelessness crisis is top of mind. We see it everywhere we go. It's a significant problem that affects all of us. It's a human tragedy. And by not tackling this issue, we download the costs onto public systems, healthcare, justice, shelters, and for a municipality, onto things like policing and encampment response. If we focus our energy and resources only on crisis responses, we are also likely to miss other opportunities to address the underlying issue of the housing need. We can't simply chip away at the homelessness problem without thinking about the other part of the iceberg beneath the surface. We're in a massive housing deficit in Edmonton and in Canada, a situation that has taken decades to develop and will take years and resources to address. It's an issue that can't be resolved by one organization Regional and provincial support is needed, and ideally all orders of government, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector all need to work together towards the same goals. We need to build capacity. We need strong local partners. We need good policy, and we need good processes to make investments that will last. On another note of optimism, we are well positioned to see our interests and investments converge. The National Housing Strategy has helped to ramp up efforts across the country, and the province's new strategy, Stronger Foundations, also creates opportunities to leverage resources and support towards common goals and targets. As the mayor said this past week, we can think of affordable housing as core infrastructure. To make sure we keep on top of housing need, we need to make it part of our regular business, no different than roads and parks, rec centers, and fire stations. Affordable housing providers will be able to count on my team at the city to help leverage resources from other orders of government, investors, and funding partners. Through consistency and predictability, we'll make real progress on the housing supply gap and the homelessness crisis. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Jeff. And now we will go to questions. I haven't actually seen it yet, so.
Yeah, no problem.
Oh, somebody wanted to have
A copy of the presentation. That's it.
Oh, perfect.
If there are any questions, feel free to pop them in here. Maybe I can ask Jeff a question to start.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think the biggest challenge in
what's you work on a day-to-day basis on housing developments. What's the biggest challenge in actually getting a housing development across the finish line?
That is a really good question. I think it's still multi-factors. I don't think it's just one thing. It's the land, the capital investments available upfront to help build, but it's also the operational costs and funding and opportunities behind it to make sure that we can keep the housing affordable for as long as possible and for as deep of a subsidy as possible for those that need it.
I'm getting some issues about the audio. Can you still hear it? Oh, it's just background.
Okay.
We're in the city hall right now, and there's a little bit of noise going on right now, so that might be echoing back. I don't know if anybody else is experiencing this difficulty. Any other questions for Jeff? What excites you about your job, Jeff? Like, what do you get excited about?
I get excited about really the passion that we see from the community. More recently, especially through the pandemic, a lot of organizations become more interested in housing and how to be able to support it for the community and the people that they serve and they support in Edmonton. So traditionally, organizations that have never worked in housing have found people, found leadership, their boards, everyone behind them are very interested in figuring out ways to support their community through housing, as they see it as such a big part of their need. And so it's been great to see that passion and a lot of questions, curiosity, ideas. I think that has just been very encouraging that this is out there, and my team and I are always happy to hear all of those ideas, and we try our best to work through those with everyone. And so, yeah, it's really just to see how much the community truly cares and wants to support one another and make sure that no one is left in homelessness.
Got a question here. Sorry,
Sorry, I didn't have my microphone up on the earlier questions, but how can community leagues help advocate for and integrate supportive, affordable, and near-market housing?
That's a great question. I think we do our best to encourage our partners. We try to reach out to community leagues and community as we try to prepare land to be as shovel-ready as possible. And so we welcome any discussion with community leagues. I think there's opportunity for more discussion and education, and we are happy with our team to help support that as best as possible, to help us host events, to help us reach out to community and show your support and the reasons behind why you're supporting affordable and supportive housing in your communities. We're more than happy to provide you with resources and have those discussions and figure out how to best move forward. But I think it's ongoing communications and relationship building with the city as well, and with our providers and with those that are seeking to build affordable housing. I think that's the best way that community leagues can support more of that development in their communities.
I'd also add that if you're a community league, you're hoping to do some more discussions within your community. If you want any information, like the stuff around the housing needs assessment or anything else, feel free to email the city at supportivehousing@edmonton.ca, and we'll work with you and try to find some stats for you or some information for you that can help contextualize the need for affordable housing and supportive housing in all parts of Edmonton, because really the need is so huge. I've got another question, which is how many of the new sites, renovated sites, are accessible for people with mobility? You may not be able to answer this question because it's very specific, but maybe you have some idea.
I can speak to some of the projects that are supportive housing that are associated with the Rapid Housing Initiative that we've worked on. I believe there are at least about 2 currently at Prairie Manor, which is the Days Inn on the south side. That's run by the Mustard Seed, and they've been able to renovate 2 of those. They're also seeking funding and support to try and renovate more units to be accessible. Then there are 6 slated for the Sands Hotel that will be coming online in the new year. And then with our 5 modular sites, there are at least 10% of each of units in each of the buildings that are barrier-free and accessible. Unfortunately, I don't have the statistics or numbers from the social housing side, but again, as Brent had mentioned, if you want to send us that question, if it's for social housing, we can clarify that through email at supportivehousing@edmonton.ca.
And obviously there's
quite a big difference between the couple projects you mentioned, that you're renovating an existing structure versus building new. Yeah, and it's a huge component. There are sort of numbers that are required for, I think, for the Affordable Housing Investment Program, those grants. So the city's capital grant program. That's a key factor in determining whether a project goes forward. So I've got a couple more questions, at least.
Okay.
Are there new housing solutions that will be specific to Indigenous community needs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. As recommended by council and with the interests of our own groups, and also funding opportunities that we also want to take advantage of and be able to support our Indigenous community here in Edmonton and Treaty 6. We're looking at Indigenous-led shelter strategies. We're also looking at Indigenous-led affordable housing strategies. Also a part of our AHIP program, that's our Affordable Housing Investment Program. There have been grants that have been provided to different Indigenous-led groups looking at providing affordable housing to Indigenous community members. Also in our RHI projects and supportive housing projects, a few of the sites are dedicated 100% to Indigenous community members that would need supportive housing. They're run by groups like Niganan and by Bent Arrow and a Native Counseling Services Center. And they provide culturally relevant support services along with other support services as well. And so there are multiple routes that we're trying to tackle and support Indigenous peoples that are experiencing homelessness.
Great. Okay. There's another question in terms of, I'll just read it out.
Mhm,
Hi there. I currently represent an organization that trains in construction. One of our programs currently builds eco-friendly one-bedroom homes as part of their training
mhm.
to get into skilled trades. We are currently seeking a great initiative to donate these houses. We'd like to partner with the Supportive Housing Initiative to give these houses now and in the future. Is this something the city would be interested in?
Absolutely. I think we're always constantly looking for new solutions that are innovative and ways that we can support everyone that needs it. We do ask for your patience. We're very happy to meet with you. If you, again, reach out to us at supportivehousing@edmonton.ca. We'd love to set up a conversation and meeting with our team to discuss further. Um, uh, the thing is, we just have to have everyone understand and recognize that there are it takes time. We have to prepare the land and make sure that there is land available, depending on building codes and everything. We just want to make sure that we reduce as many barriers as possible to actually developing. And if we could find partners to operate these kind of units and these developments. So we're more than happy to have that discussion. So please reach out.
There's another question. Does the city build affordable housing on its own, or is it always in partnership with developers or CMHC?
Typically, we would do it with partners. I think our modular sites have been a atypical situation, and that was to really take advantage of the opportunity with CMHC and federal funding, and the capacity and expertise within our internal organization, our experts of architects, planners, and engineers. We're able to take advantage of the funding and help build 5 buildings at once. Ultimately, we would provide those to our partners because the city does not operate affordable housing. And there are other ideas out there that we are exploring, such as co-location of affordable or supportive housing with civic services. And to do so, we would likely be involved in the construction of such. But again, we would look to our operating partners to work with us to operate the affordable housing.
Okay, I've got one more question here. So this is a bit of this one I'll just read it out again because it's a little bit hard to summarize it.
Okay.
For people in AISH, they can't find affordable housing in their quadrant hub like Southwest Edmonton. Requires somebody's been on the Savita list for 2 years. We're told they'll never likely qualify to meet the score. Impossible to do as a single male. How can they qualify? It's extremely important that these persons maintain themselves in their neighborhoods, currently living in crowded environment, and one-bedroom apartment not maintained by a private landlord. I think it's a sort of really sort of hits home like who's in need of housing. Maybe you can sort of talk about that a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we mentioned this earlier that one of our top demographics in Edmonton through the housing needs assessment work that our team has done recognize that people with physical or mental disabilities are ones that are in more higher need of affordable housing. So some of the things that we can do, at least, is try to provide those capital grant opportunities, capital support on the front end so that we can try and ensure that there are deeper subsidies available for the operations and long term. This is where we need the investments and cooperation and partnership with all levels of government to help foster that opportunity of maintaining the capital and the operating to creating these. There are some really interesting pieces of work across the city as well. Some organizations looking at figuring out mixed market situations where you can have the rent subsidized by other people at market rent in a building to supplement the rent of those that require a deeper subsidy as a rent geared to income. Some of the other levels of government are recognizing this as well as a dire need. And so, for instance, the most recent round of Rapid Housing Initiative has requested that it does maintain affordability based on income and not based on market rent. And so there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, but it is trying to figure out all the partners coming to the table to both support the capital and to support the operating to try and create more units for those that need that deeper subsidy.
I'll add another question here. There's a clear focus on emergency need for the most vulnerable and marginalized, which is really
Mhm.
understandable. However, have we begun looking beyond this to the public housing models which are seen across Europe and available to the majority of the population, treating housing like a public utility and making affordable municipal housing available to everyone, such as Vienna?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, I think for the most part right now, figuring out and leveraging some of these funding opportunities, at least with the rapid housing as an example, that one is where we are figuring out supporting those that are in most dire need of housing, the ones that are currently facing homelessness or in most vulnerable to it. But on our other side projects, and there are other opportunities that we're working through the co-investment funds and other tranches that the federal government has created. And we're looking at opportunities and supporting organizations that are supporting different groups. And so we've had several groups coming from newcomer and refugee groups, those that are families, people of color. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of different organizations and we're figuring out other ways to support them as well. It may not be as rapid and may not be as developed as quickly as the Rapid Housing Initiative projects. We are figuring out ways to support the needs of different groups as best as possible. And we recognize, as we're hearing that from a lot of our partners and organizations that are informing us that we need more than just one bedroom and bachelor unit suites and something that we had mentioned in the presentation. So absolutely, yeah.
Okay. I'm going to read this one out too. The only nonprofit that offers subsidized housing is Savita. The tenant would only pay $375. And then it says, yes, the need for long-term sustainable, affordable, and safe living environment. I don't know if you can answer that or if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I think that is, one of our major partners that is able to provide rent subsidies at that level. I would say there are also other organizations too that are doing some of that work and partners that are working at figuring out how to provide that rent subsidy through other ways and through our supportive housing sites. So all our supportive housing sites that I had previously mentioned regarding the Rapid Housing Initiative, both the modular and the hotel conversions, are all operating at 30% year to income. And so they work with each individual to figure out what their income case is, and they work towards meeting that deep subsidy that way. And so there are multiple organizations that are trying to do that just through different mechanisms and different support services. So if that is something that you're looking for, I deeply encourage you to reach out to some of these organizations. Or if you're having trouble finding them, please reach out to us at supportivehousing@edmonton.ca, and we'd be happy to direct you to those organizations that are doing really great work.
And I think that's it for now. Thanks so much, Jeff, for doing this. And I really appreciate everyone else for coming and taking your lunch hour and listening to us. And if you have any questions, as we mentioned, supportivehousing@edmonton.ca, please let us know. And we really appreciate you being here today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.